Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. My name is Richard Cooper, and I am the President and CEO of NYSPIN. I'd like to thank our sponsors. Big Visible has been a sponsor for several years, and we greatly appreciate their support. Tonight, we are privileged to be hosted by UBS, compliments of my broker, Ronan Cox. Lemis Altan is a SEI-certified SCAMPI 1.3 lead appraiser for development and a SCAMPI BNC team lead, providing consulting and appraisal services worldwide. In fact, she has just recently returned from a trip to China. Ladies and gentlemen, Lemis Altan.
Thank you, everybody. First, I would like to thank NYSPIN for inviting me here to present to you this evening. First, about acknowledgements. The contents of what I'm going to present tonight is copyrighted to Carnegie Mellon University because they are the creator and the keeper and the updater of both the model that I'm going to talk about a little bit and the SCAMPI methodology that accompanies it. So that's really what it is. The created slides are mine. So the hard work of getting all the content out of 282 pages and putting into these slides is my work. Everything else is really copyrighted to them. The topics we're going to go through tonight. First, definitions. Just like a SCAMPI, what does that mean? I have a few definitions that some of you are going to be familiar with. Others will wonder what they are, but they're all related to the methodology and how it really has evolved and changed over the years. I have one slide that talks about the CMMI and SCAMPI evolution. So those of you who may be new, you could really see there is a history since 1987 that is associated with the model and the associated methodology of appraisals. Then we're going to talk about reasons for conducting a SCAMPI appraisal. And throughout, then we have the goals and objectives for this new version. Then the phases of the SCAMPI A method, methodology changes, and how to prepare for the SCAMPI A appraisal, a summary. However, what I'm going to do as I walk through the slides, I'm going to talk about how do you prepare for that part so that you don't really have to wait to get to the punchline to figure out, oh, how do I really get ready for one? So you will really hear that. And then as a summary, we're just going to review what we have already discussed in what I have presented. You can ask questions, and Richard will allow me to answer questions, provided I don't go over my bounded time. And he's going to also give me some signals about 20 minutes, 15 minutes, and 10 and 5, and then I will be silenced. Okay. So some definitions. CMM is really capability maturity model. CMMI is the integration of that model. The ARC, sometimes you may or may not be familiar with it, it stands for appraisal requirements for CMMI. Those are really the requirements about the appraisal methodology, what really must be done within that appraisal. The SCAMPI stands for Standard CMMI Appraisal, Method for Process Improvement. And it's really designed to provide a benchmark. And the SCAMPI MDD is a 282-page manual that I said that I had distilled it into the 56 slides. There's a pie. Those of you who have been through the appraisals before, you may have heard about the PID and PII. Those are really, the PII stands for Practice Implementation Indicator. In other words, the proof that you have implemented a certain practice. And the PID is the infamous spreadsheets that you really complete to say these are the documents that really, or artifacts that go with a certain practice. Okay, that's the proof that I have done. Further definitions, organizational unit is the unit or area of a company that's being appraised. It could be a software group. It could be an application development group. It could be a maintenance group. It could be a service group. It is really the group that you are really appraising. Or it could be the entire company. Appraisal scope is the boundaries of this appraisal that you're going to be conducting. It could be the entire company. It could be a division of that company. It could be a group within that division or several groups within that division. And it also talks about the appraisal scope also encompasses, since there's 5 different levels of the model, if you're doing a maturity level, which is a type of appraisal that talks about the level of maturity in the organization, then it also includes that particular model scope. Gaps in the implementation are better known as weaknesses. And the exemplary practice implementation is known as the strengths. In the model, if you implement to the practice requirement, that is just meeting the requirement. An example, a strength is doing or performing something above and beyond, so that it could be used as an excellent example all throughout the other groups within the organization. Objective evidence is either artifacts, and those are known as documents. I always call them documents. And affirmations, which are really the results of interviews, whether they could be oral or it could be written. And the artifacts and affirmations are again defined because those are really key as you're going through preparing for the appraisal and conducting the appraisal. But these are some of the new terminology. Okay, a basic unit. Previously, all of these SCAMPIs you have been informed about, or you have participated about, or sponsor about, is you really have heard and talked in terms of projects, because they were more focused on development efforts than maybe services. The SCAMPI version 1.3 encompasses whether it's a service, whether it's a development project, or it's an acquisition effort, etc. And therefore, the basic unit refers to a group of interrelated resources. And I'm going to expand on that as we talk about it. It could be a set of projects. It could be a single project. It could be some service unit. It could be, for example, call center, or network admin group, or system admin group. Those are the services. And you could really appraise those against the services model now. And the support functions is really the group of the within the organization or within the company who actually helps support the projects or services. And examples of that could be configuration management group. You may have a CM group that is really encompasses all throughout the company. You may have a quality assurance group who may be actually providing services to multiple groups, okay? Or organizational training. You don't want to have 5 different organizational training, environments. You want to have one that really services all of the organization. The sampling factor is a new terminology, and it's really describes the organizational or work context that reflects meaningful differences. For example, you may have 10 projects. 2 of them might be truly development efforts. Then 3 of them might be maintenance efforts. And the others might be development or maintenance or enhancements, but they may be located in a different environment, a different location, and they may have different customers. So now we really need to look at the work that is done in the context of what are the differences among these cluster of work, so that we really need to do an analysis of that to determine what really needs to be appraised and what is appropriate to be appraised. The subgroups are the clusters of basic units. I'm going to give you an example of what these are that have common factors. For example, all the work in New York may be done slightly different than all the work that gets done in Boston or in LA. There are some differences in the implementation of the processes. So when you really need to look at that, and you need to take those into account now when you are doing appraisals. Database of objective evidence is those of you who may have gone through the SCAMPIs and know about the infamous PIDs, which is really the workbook, the spreadsheet with all of the proof, documented, evidence. Now they're going away from the PID because that's got a very bad connotation, and everybody thinks it takes too many hours to put it together, and this is done before the actually what we consider on-site activities. So they're calling it a database. So we need something, some indication of what piece of document is related to what practice, or what key documents are associated with certain practices, so that we're not really going into a room with a database online or on the web or on Wiki or anywhere, and you're searching for evidence. Okay? This makes it easier and makes it more efficient to do the appraisals. And the appraisal tailoring is, as I said, the methodology is really all-encompassing, and we are given now a specific tailoring guidance so that we can take the methodology and tailor it to the organization's needs. And that's really known as the tailoring of the appraisal or the methodology. This slide shows the history of the CMM and the CMMI, which is really the development effort and methodology. The lavender, or it was supposed to be blue, the blue here is all the CMM, which is Capability Maturity Model. And it's from 1987 till 1993. In 1999, it was still going on in 1999, Department of Defense put out a policy expecting their software development organizations to be at the maturity level 3. And that really made everybody, especially in the DoD environment, all the suppliers to DoD, go through these appraisals, and the floodgates were open. Everybody had to have it. And in year 2000, it had gotten to the point that when they had this model, they started with software. Then they went into systems. The systems people said, no, system is different than software, so we want their own model. They came up with their own model. Then they said, no, this is for a large organization. We really have integrated development teams, so there was another model. And pretty soon, there were so many different models to Sunday that people start saying, what is this all about? So at year 2000, they took the systems and software, systems engineering and software development models, and combined it and called it the CMM integration, or CMMI. And that's really when they also introduced the SCAMPI methodology, because up to this point, you really had a discovery-based appraisals, some other types of skis and things of that nature. And I said, no, SCAMPI is going to be right here, and we are going to use a verification method because discovery types of activities were taking too long. They were making the databases available, and it took the appraisal teams 3-4 weeks to figure out and look at all of the documentation, plus have the affirmations or interviews that really went with it. So they said, no, what really we're going to do is we're going to do this in verification mode. Therefore, the organization is going to prepare those workbooks and give us the evidence so that we really verify the evidence, yes or no, and the gaps in that, instead of us looking for it to locate it. And that was at 2000. Now, in 2002 to 2006, they really came up with different versions of it, updates to it, scrubbing the model, refining it, etc. From 2007 to 2009, the demand was gotten to the point saying, yes, CMMI, is for development, but we're a service organization, or we also have a service organization, and we have to stand on our heads and bend our, bend our legs in a way so that we can really adapt this model to our services. So why don't you guys come out with a service model that really fits the service organizations? And that's why we have now CMMI for services, a specific model addressing all types of services. And in the meantime, General Motors really wanted to have an acquisition model saying, we're not developing anything, but we're buying a lot of parts and pieces, whether it's really software, it's hardware, or whatever it is. And we want to be able to have a model that really addresses the acquisition. What do I really do as an acquirer of the products and services? And how do I really then go and prepare and look at, what am I supposed to look at when I'm buying a product? And that there came up with CMMI for acquisition. In 2010, Capers-Jones actually named CMMI the top software engineering practice. And in 2011, there was 1.3 version of the 3 different models were accomplished.
I don't know how many other people this applies to, but I'm not really familiar with Capers-Jones. Could you just...
Capers-Jones, I believe, evaluates different, maybe somebody knows it better than I do, but they're the evaluator of different software technologies, different environments, different methodologies. And apparently they're quite famous. I have to say I'm not really that familiar with them either. Okay. But they do all their evaluations against the industry models, against the industry practices, and they named that the top software one. Okay. And moving on, at 2003, now we have 3 different models, very distinct models. And at 2013, as a matter of fact, at the beginning of this year, about 8 days ago, the SCI, who was responsible, Software Engineering Institute, who was responsible for the stewardship of all the CMMI models, transferred that responsibility to the CMMI Institute under Carnegie Mellon University. Because SCI itself is a federally funded research and development institute. Okay? Well, after the model, having, from their perception, from 1987, it's a long time to steward, and it's really a settled, now fully developed model. And it's not really, it should not be under research and development anymore. There may be some, advances and enhancements to the model, but the model is not in flux anymore. It's very stable. Therefore, they transferred that, still under Carnegie Mellon, into a CMMI Institute. So now let's talk about, why would you want to go through a SCAMPI appraisal? Before I put you through the pain of the details, I just want to go through and say, why would you want to do that? If you're a sponsor or if you're a process person or somebody from your organization comes in and says, oh, we got to have an appraisal, right? Why would they want to do that? First, they may want to gain insight into the organization's capability against the implemented processes, or whatever processes, development processes that they have, or whatever service processes they may have. And they would want to have it not just go and take a look at it and tell me, but against an established model. The second one is to put the improvement plans into some sort of a priority. You may have multiple things to improve in your development or your service environment, and you would want to know which one is going to get you the most for the, the bang for the buck, right? You don't want to spend your efforts in minuscule improvements where there is a big, elephant sitting in the corner that really could get you a lot of mileage if you really improve that one. And focus on improvements. In other words, correct the weaknesses. Wherever you have weaknesses or gaps, you may want to know, as a result of the appraisal, okay, let me go through a formal appraisal and find out where my weaknesses are, so then I can start focusing on those. And believe me, from the minute weaknesses to the big weaknesses, everything really comes out during an appraisal. And then drive the capability level or a maturity level. If you're a DoD contractor, you would definitely want a maturity level, right? Because DoD said what? In every single RFP, which is the requirements, for a proposal, they put down must have maturity level 3. Sometimes they don't know what maturity level 3 is. Okay? But it's there. It is there. So if, in fact, you need to bid on a contract with any of the government agencies, and you see that, you're already getting nixed because you don't have that, okay, appraisal level, right? So that might be a driving factor. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, saying, look, we got to go after government contracts. We got to do a lot of development or services, and we have to be at this level. So we got to do the work to be able to gain the business, right? That's really spending money to get future business. There's nothing wrong with that. And if you're from Virginia, Northern Virginia, or Maryland, or anywhere government offices are, that's really a big, 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 big incentive to get into that. The other one is identifying risks relative to your capabilities or maturities. Right? What are the risks to our success? And it could be a benchmark. You want to benchmark against the CMMI models and see where you are. The model has 5 levels. Are you at level 1? Are you at level 2? Or a 3? Okay, or a 5? I could tell you all the large DoD contractors are all at 5.
Question for you. In some of the past jobs that I've been in, we've required subcontractors to be a level 5 organization. And they showed us the certifications, and so they got the assignments. We noticed that they were definitely not operating with us at level 5. Is there something you as evaluators can do to determine if they're actually operating at level 5 and not just certified at level 5?
Certified. Okay. The appraisal itself is an instant in time. Yeah. When we really do the appraisal, at the end of the appraisal, then we really give them a rating, okay? Now, the company immediately, my experience, company immediately goes back, right? Honestly, I'm not, because they achieved it, therefore they can relax, they can take it easy, and everybody starts deeming that, do we really need to do this little part? And they start taking back. Now, what I've really seen is when you have a very strong QA organization and a strong engineering process group, they do not allow for that to happen. Okay?
So it's up to us to make sure they operate at that level.
Yes, it is up to you to operate. And the other thing too is, as a sub, as the prime, it's up to you to check on me, and you have a right to do that. And what I would really suggest, put it on your contract. You'll have a right to go and inspect their processes. You can write it any way you want, but you should be there, okay?
Yeah, and from my experience back in the CMM days, just to add to that, that's the first of about 10 questions you need to ask. Show me show me the proof that you're at a maturity level. What was the scope of that assessment? If it's with Part A and you're working with Organization B,
right.
There's no guarantee Organization B has
right.
even been a part of it.
Right.
True. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So right. Okay.
Will you share your results? So there's a whole string you share.
What you have a right to see, okay, those types of things, and you have a right to ask, as I agree. You should ask not just the certificate, because that certificate has a date, okay, and that certification supposedly is really good for 3 years. But do you really know they're operating after 2.5 years or even 6 months later into what they really performed, or did they start rolling back? Okay. And you should ask which, because I mean, let's face it. There are large companies, one group claims, earns the rating, and they claim it for the entire company. Does the entire company? No, absolutely not, okay? But they claim that. As a lead appraiser, I always put down, if it's a division, I always put down the division. And if it's a group within that, it's the development group, I always put in such and such division, this group, okay? So the certificate itself shows you. But it's not a requirement for all the appraisers to do that. So I cannot really attest to everyone. But that's really those things. And you should then start really saying, okay, I want to know the projects, I want to see the results, and I want to see the appraisal disclosure statement. And then you can start really peeling the onion to get to what you really want to get to. Go ahead.
You mentioned the phrase 3 years, and that's a big difference from CMM to CMMI.
Yes.
Will you talk about that a little bit in some detail? Maybe not right now, but
Sure. Remind me if I don't. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. An appraisal is valid for 3 years, but I will talk about that a little bit more. Okay. So this is really you want to know if one of the DoD contractors is a level 5, my God, I'm going to compete with them, so I better be at level 5, right? That's another one of really finding what is really the benchmarking. Why do you do that? And the other one is for marketing purposes, for benchmarking against your competitors. Okay, you want to do that. A lot of companies really do this as well. I have seen them. Okay, our competitors are XYZ. They all have mature level 5 or level 3. Majority of companies have really level 3. Level 3, we have to compete with them. In order to do that, we really have to be able to match them or eventually surpass them. There's also some companies, they do it because they want to be the first one. Okay? They want to be the first company in that industry or in that province, and I see that a lot in China. They want to be the first company to claim that, flag and say, we're the first ones, therefore we're really legit. All of our other competitors are struggling, but we, if you trust us, will give you, the products and the services and the applications you're looking for. And we can do it on time and within budget, right? So that's really what they do. Also in this country, there's a lot of companies who actually have those maturity levels, and they do not post it, they do not make it public. Okay? They want to do a stealth operation against their competitors. So they can, if they have to bid on a piece of government work that requires it, they will include all of the enclosures. But on a public basis, if there's a public website that you can go and see all the companies who have various levels, they don't want to be part of it. Again, it's really what your marketing strategy is, what your competitive strategy is, and that's why you would have that. So when you decide that you need to do an appraisal, okay, take a look as to why. What is the reason? And be honest about it. Hey, we got to compete against this guy over here. That's why we got to do it. And make sure that you really know that, and make sure that you can really share that with your lead appraiser. Don't hide anything from the appraiser, because your lead appraiser, yes, is going to come in and lead a group to do the appraisal, but pretty soon it's going to be very obvious to that person as to why you're doing it. So say it up front. These are the reasons I would like to have an appraisal. And think about that too. Why are you doing what you're doing? Because maybe you don't even need one. Okay? Now, other lead appraisers might kill me for saying that, but just because this is the thing to do today, you may not need one, because it's going to cost you a lot of time and effort. And then with that, there's a lot of dollars associated with that. And the least of the money that you're going to give is to the lead appraiser, because internally you have to do a lot of work to get ready for that appraisal. So this is really one thing you should really think in terms of, why do you want to have it? And have the discussion of and whatever it is, put it on the table. It's better known than unknown. It also helps the lead appraiser if they understand your motives behind it, because they're going to see all kinds of things. And believe me, we look over 2,000 records, okay? 2,000 documents for a level 3 project effort. I'm telling you, after the first half hour, I can tell you what the purpose was behind it, whether you told me or not. So it would be good to really tell. Because then we can prepare. Their impetus is really this and that. So let me think in terms of what I'm going to see, how I'm going to see, and what, the outcome. I'm not going to budge, right? But it's good to know that. Okay. So now the SCAMPI version 1.3, the goals and objectives. Well, as I mentioned before, at the previous methodologies, they were all focused on engineering or development model, okay? The projects. well, what about all the services? Because nobody is really pure development anymore. They have services. Therefore, they wanted to make sure that there was an increased efficiency in the appraisal process. And they were really looking at various different types of things. Change concepts is appraisal scoping. I'm going to talk a lot about scoping. Up to now, most people said, oh, well, we'll do 3. You may have 100 different efforts going on, but we'll do 3 and you'll be fine. Well, in this case, you're not fine. And that's really what the appraisal scoping. What is the organization? Okay, what is the size of that? What is the boundaries of that? And again, if I have one itty-bitty group over here who's doing development, could I apply it to 1,000 people effort, right? You can't do that. You really have to look at and you have to analyze what is the scope of this thing. If it's Division A, if it's all Division A, versus it is a certain part of Division A. Or it could be Division A and Division B. Well, all of a sudden, the scope really increased. So the effort is going to be increased as well. This is about sufficiency and coverage. If I have one support group, one CM group in one division, it might service all, right? But if I have a QA group within a certain development group, and they're not really doing any work against the rest of the work that really gets done in that division, I cannot really say that I have looked at everything. So this is really puts a lot of emphasis on identifying and clarifying that effort. Where does this appraisal, who does it apply to? Okay, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. So, Chris. As Chris said, if you have a huge division and you have the 10-person, I'm just exaggerating a little bit, 10-person group evaluated and appraised, what about the other 990? Where is that? And this really makes it very clear. And it really forces everyone, including the company and the lead appraiser, not to broad brush any of the things really being recognized. Formalizing the plans for data collection and resources. Where is the data going to come from? Before, everybody kind of waved their hands and they said, oh, we have all of these documents, we have all these interviews, and we're done. Well, now we are required to document it because that effort needs to be really realized by the sponsor. And that effort also not only realized, but they have to be funded. And it's all internal funding, not necessarily external funding. So those kinds of things really need to be known.
Do you have any data on a quantifiable value for going from one level to another?
SCI has publications, and I'd be more than glad to locate them and give you some pointers as to where you can find them. They do have publications. Off the top of your head, can you give They're
any sort of
talking,
ballpark?
they typically talk about, depends on where you're coming from, okay? But typically, I would say 25 to 35%. I'm using that just for my gauge. Because if you really have...
Per level? Going from level 1 to level 2 and then from level 2 to
level 1,
3?
you're just like all over the place.
3,
And
3
2 to
4,
3,
4,
yeah,
5.
maybe, yeah. In 2 to 3, maybe you will, yes. I would maybe even more. Depending on your implementation, depending on your seriousness. I mean, I have seen some work, incredible amount of work done within a year. Okay, and I can, those sponsors are the ones saying, I know now when I'm going to get the end product. I know what the requirements are, and I know when they change and who's changing them. Okay, so that's really, their sponsors are telling me, I know these things now, and now I want to make sure that I have proof of that. Okay, and that's why they do the appraisal. They do. You have tremendous amounts of gains, but then also you may have a sloppy interpretation of it. You get through the barrier, but how perfect it is, right? And you may not get it, but I'll find it for you, Mike. Okay? Go ahead. You had a question.
I guess this ties in with that. You would say from 2 to 3, that would be like the bulge where you realize the most efficiencies.
Yes. I definitely say that. I do not advocate every single company should be at level 5. As a matter of fact, I would advocate not. No. If you really do a level required for a maturity level 3 and you're doing it well, you have realized all the gains. All right. If you want to get fancy, go ahead and do quantitative project management. But frankly, you give me a solid level 3 organization, is working, humming like, you know, a well-oiled engine, I'll take it any day over a 5. And that's really my belief. And I always tell them, why do you want to do level 5? Tell me why. And if it's a lot of hand waving, it's not good enough, really. A solid 3, someone who can really control their requirements, someone who can meet their deadlines, and they know exactly where they are, what they're doing, what phase of the life cycle they're in, I'll take that over any time on anything else. Because in level 3, you have your project management, you have your engineering practices, and you have your organizational process management to really guide and ride herd over it. That's really what you really need. The rest of it, 4 and 5, is fancy for me. Okay, there is a different way of looking at things, and we're going to talk about that and the change of the getting back to version 1.3. As I said, SCAMPIs were more like verification. Okay, and before SCAMPIs, it was all discovery. So it was really one end or the other. Verification says, give me all the proof. I will sit here, do all the interviews, and within a 10-day, I will give you the results. Discovery says, give me about a month. And give me all these people. I will bring them from outside, and we will be spending about a month, and then we'll tell you at the end, okay, what you have and what you don't have. Managed discovery is in the middle of those two, and I think it will really help a lot of sponsors about the total cost. And those of you who have been through some appraisals, you know about a direct artifact or indirect artifact, direct evidence or indirect evidence. The direct evidence is the direct result of accomplishing or implementing a practice. And indirect evidence is all the steps of what I have produced to get there. Right? No more. And everybody hears about that saying, thank God, we don't have to put up with it, because sorting out data takes also time and effort, and it's just irrelevant. And also the multi-constellation appraisals. Now with version 1.3 appraisals, we can appraise development, acquisition, services, and a combination. Okay, combination of all those. They're known as multi-constellation appraisals, but you can have the service group appraise at the same time as the development. The second change, the goal was to remove barriers for broader usage. And again, they were talking about projects, now they're talking about basic units. Sampling of subgroups, and looking at the team qualifications. They changed those as well.
Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
With that expansion, do you know if there's any discussion going on related to CMMI and its levels and ITIL? Because I did ITIL for several years, and a company called Peak would do Peak scans, and they would use the 1 through 6, but it was it wasn't the rigor of CMMI, and the whole IT infrastructure and services. ITIL is definitely a great step, but it could be improved.
Yes. I don't know any actual work is being done. However, you can do ITIL implementations and appraise them under CMMI services. You could do that. Because the way I was involved with ITIL a few years back, what I really could do with ITIL is more prescriptive. So if I had a service call center, for example, I could utilize those prescriptive process steps and say, which one fits to mine? I'll adapt them, and what do I really need to tailor or just tweak a little bit to adapt them? But that also goes under service, right? Now the service model is really very close to it, so then I can really say, okay, well, it's really close to service, so it's I'm like implementing this service goal in the CMMI model for services, and I got it from ITIL. there's no boundary there. So you could really do that. And a lot of companies are now thinking in terms of that. Once the service model came out, a lot of adoption of the ITIL really is being now appraised under services because a lot of it really fits in. It's very close by. Okay, and then the third goal was to synchronize with the product suite. So they cleaned up a lot of the MDD clarifications under that. They simplified it, and they adapted to all of the CMMI plus People CMM. Okay, what most people don't know, there's a People CMM model, which talks about really how do you really improve the people's work, and how do you identify, how do you actually grow your people? What kinds of things do you really do? Moving on, there's 3 phases to a SCAMPI appraisal. The first one is planning. Most people don't know that part because that kind of gets done, okay, and it doesn't get a lot of spotlights, highlights. But you need to know the appraisal goals and objectives. And those appraisal goals and objectives starts with your business goals and objectives. And it's very important then as a sponsor or somebody who's going to go to a sponsor, like a process person, right? Go to a sponsor, we need to have a formal appraisal. The business goals has to be defined. Then you can drive the appraisal goals because of that. If your business goals does not really include anything about competing with your competitors because of the mature level 3 competitiveness, then why are you doing it? It really needs to start with the business goals. Then you go into your appraisal goals because that has to support it. You don't have an appraisal for appraisal's sake. And I would be the first person to say, don't do it because there's no reason for it. There's got to be a business reason behind it. And I've been a business person for many, 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 many years on top of being an engineer and all that other stuff. So to me, I put on my business hat and go, tell me why I should spend this money. And if you can't justify it because it fits into some sort of a business objective, then we don't really need to do it. Then you need to plan the appraisal, train the people, perform a readiness review to make a decision whether you go to the next phase or not. This is what everybody thinks when it's talking about an appraisal. What we really call on-site activities. This is where you see all the action, right? You see all the materials being collected previously, and then you see all of the people walking around, running around saying, I got to find this evidence, that evidence. And you say, well, I'm on the team, I'm not on the team, I'm qualified to be on the team. And you see the team actually working, clustered, in some environments, sometimes in more than one conference room, working together. And then at the end, you go to a meeting and they say, okay, you achieved your goal. And here's the weaknesses. Right? This is what everybody thinks it is. It starts with a kickoff, where you really need to kick off the formal on-site activities part, and you need to talk about what is going to happen within the next however many days. And how are we really going to look at the evidence, and how are we really going to look at the interview results, so that you have an idea of what's going to take place, and you also have an idea how the weaknesses are going to be identified, because there's various different levels of characterizing the findings. So you're going to know that. This part is the one that it takes most of the time, and that's the part you examine the documentation that's given to you, which is known as artifacts, and continue and conduct the interviews. The interviews you conduct may be face-to-face, it could be wire, it could be video, it could be audio conference, etc., etc. This really takes the bulk of the work. And most people remember it because they may have been interviewed as a process owner, or they may have been interviewed as a practitioner, okay? Requirements manager. Well, got to interview them to find out how they do their work. You can't ask that to some guy sitting over there who's never known anything about requirements management. So they ask the appropriate people. And this takes a lot of time. Then we have to have an initial findings. we have to validate what we have so far with everyone we have interviewed. Because there may be some other piece of evidence that we have not been given, right? We don't forgive people giving incorrect information during the interview, saying after they see all the findings, oh yeah, now I remember. Well, you know, we can't give credit for that. But any additional documents, we definitely look at and we record that. And at the end, we characterize all of the practices at the organizational unit level. We consolidate them, we rate them, and we prepare the final findings. So if you're interested in a maturity level or capability level, this is really where it's done. And then the last one is presentation of the final findings, executive session, and the wrap-up. These are the differences that we're going to. These are all processes and activities. This is the detail. What to remember is the green is the new one. Blue is they have made a lot of changes to it. And we're going to talk about them one at a time. Right here. This went away or moved up. And there are some changes there. And these went up, etc. Okay. Now, there's 3 different strategies now of data collection. You know that previously it was verification or it was discovery. One extreme versus other. Now this is managed discovery. Managed discovery actually says you start with a key set of documents and then you have subsequent data calls to be able to, okay, get more information. And it makes it a lot easier on the organization to collect that. The data collection strategy outlines the overall high-level approach. When you're going to collect, what you're going to collect, and when. And it should be tailored to meet the needs of the organization. If you're an organization, you have been gone through at least one previous appraisal, and you have your database or your PID ready, you may want to do another verification because you don't have to really search all over the place for the appropriate document. You may be able to do that. But if you're doing it for the first time and you're not really quite sure, you may want to say, okay, we'll do managed discovery, give us the list of key documents, we'll get those, and then we'll, manage the rest of it. There's consequences to that. Depending on which strategy you pick, you really have to determine amount of time, and effort. That's going to be expended by the organization as well as the appraisal team. Okay. Ability to make judgments during the appraisal. If you say, well, we'll do a managed discovery and there is some key documents you cannot get your hands on, there's nothing can be done during the example, right? It's an appraisal to say, except we don't have those, therefore they are weaknesses. Okay. The accuracy and the usefulness of the appraisal results, again, depending on what you really decide, you may be searching and not anything, and you may not be accurate what you really reflect on. And the overall cost. Okay? Everybody really thinks that the cost of doing the on-site part is really the biggest cost. No. But in verification-based appraisals, it's the all upfront work that is done by the organization is also be counted on. So you really need to look at the total cost when you're deciding one of those. And the appraisal planning, depending on which strategy you pick, the planning really needs to fit into that. These are the differences between version 1.1 and 1.2 and 1.3. There are some things that's been really changed in the scope. For example, now it really happens to include all of the various constellations, including people's CNM. We used to say critical factors that really made a difference. So when you're looking at 10 different projects, you would really take a look at those to determine which projects you really should be looking at. Well, now they're talking about sampling factors. And sampling factors are very, very important because it drives you quantitatively now to pick and choose what you need to examine. Okay. Before, as I said, you may have 100 projects, but you can say, oh, well, I can do 3 and I'll satisfy the requirement. Not anymore. There is no minimum. Okay? What you need to find is the minimum is after you go through all of your analysis, that really drives your minimum. And this is the quantitative base for documenting representative samples. Support functions before, they were included, okay, but they were not really focused on. Now there is a big focus on support functions and where do they fit, how do they fit, and how do they really need to be sampled. And the process areas now are looked at between basic units implementation and support function implementation versus organizational level and project level. The organizational scope is really selected on looking at samples, okay, and consists of the reference model, documented terms, etc. Sampling establishes the organizational scope, and scoping defines the organizational unit. So you want to do a whole division of 1,000 people, maybe that's not really realistic. Maybe you need to look at some subsections of that to really keep on, okay? Keep it under management. If you want the whole division, it may take a month, maybe more. But if you want part of that, then it might be more manageable. There's 3 steps to define an organizational unit. First, identify how people are organized. Second, what are those sampling factors that make a difference in their organization? And the third is document what you really have based on your sampling factors. These are the standard sampling factors we must look at now. It's the location, customer, size, organizational structure, and type of work. You need to examine each of those in the context of what you're really trying to do against the basic units or projects or services or a combination of the two so that you can determine if it makes any difference. Okay? As an example, I said, you know, you may be doing work in New York and in LA, and the LA work is slightly different implementation of the same processes. So now you really have to look at those dynamics. You have to look at those differences. You may have, I will have an example for you, a customer that's specific customer-driven effort versus what they are known as a general product, okay, effort, and the organizational structure as well. Sampling factors must be documented. It's not hand-waving anymore. It's got to be in the plan. And if you don't find any differences between this work, then you really have to start asking what makes a difference here. Because maybe it's the funding source, maybe complexity, maybe duration, there is something. If there's nothing, then you document there's nothing, but you have to put justification as to there is, you know, why that doesn't.
Yeah. Okay. The appraiser team does the sampling?
Appraiser, the lead appraiser, some of the representatives from the organization really does the hard work, and then they bounce it off through the sponsor to make sure that he really agrees with it, okay? Because let's face it, sponsor is not going to have the time to spend all of that. But this is really as a process person, as an EPG person, which is the engineering process group person, these are the kinds of things you need to think in terms of as to what makes a difference. Okay, we're going to have that, but let's take a look at it. We have some services, we have some projects. Well, do we want to combine them? Do we want to have one? Or do we want to have these projects? Do we really want to look at all of these projects or part of the projects? And what are the differences between those differences? Because then you have to kind of organize them together. And to determining the representative sample, there are some steps to that. Identify the subgroups. In other words, you may have 20 projects, and I've worked with 20 projects. Okay, 5 of them is really for a certain part of the DoD, and they drive certain things differently. The second 4 is another part of another organization, and it's still for the Department of Defense, but they are requiring certain things differently. So you need to really adapt to those. So then you really put them into some grouping so that you know what this 10 projects or 20 projects, how they are really grouped together, or they can be grouped together. And then you can identify I'm going to use projects at this point, projects within those subgroups, and then you can really say, okay, I have 6 in here, I have 4 in here, and these are really how they really slice and dice. And then you can really decide on that. Okay. And depending on how you look at those 20 projects and doing that, you may decide you really cannot afford, okay, to do all 20. You may need to go with 10. And that really drives, again, your organizational scope and the scope of the appraisal. If you think that if you go and do the 20 different projects within that division, then it's going to take you a month. Maybe you cannot do that. There are other constraints in the life of doing work, right? An organization, you can't do that. So you may decide, well, you will need to take a look at this subgroup and that subgroup, and then you may do it later. Okay. Here's an example. This is actually an example I did. I appraised this particular company. They had 7 projects, and they said, okay, size really makes a difference. Whew. I'm running behind. Size made a difference. Self-development versus custom made a difference. Organizational structure made a difference. And we grouped them together, and we sliced and diced them based on that. Okay? Then we must use this equation, and it's a requirement, to really put the projects into different subgroups and use the equation to drive how many from each area we need to sample. And the bottom line was we need to do 4. Okay. And this is based on the formula of if it's if it's less than 1.5, you do 1. If it's more than 1.5, you do 2. But if it's less than 1, you do at least 1. So then there is a bunch of coverage rules. Coverage rules for process areas, basic units, and support functions. And it's really detailed. And I have all of the details here, but I'm not going to go because you can really read them. But going through all of this, this is really what breaks down. And by process area, by project and support group, we really had to determine who we were going to ask what area of questions. And this really kind of then drives how many days it's going to take, because you need to not only get the documentation that you really need to look at, but you also have to interview. Okay? Tailoring the method. In a nutshell, in the previous versions, tailoring was all over the place. There was a tailoring method section. There was everywhere else there was, and you really had to hunt through. Now there is one section and there's one checklist. And everything tailorable about the method, about the methodology, is on that checklist. If it's not on that checklist, that's not tailoring. You can make a lot of decisions. You cannot say, you cannot do them, but that's not considered tailoring. So there's a clear-cut definition of what is tailored and what are the decisions that you make. And here's some examples. For example, if you want a mature level or not, that's tailoring. Okay? But deciding on the organizational model and scope, it's not really tailoring. It's what you really pick to evaluate. Okay. Developing data collection plan, this is really involved. And depending on which one you really pick, which one of those strategies you pick, you really need to take a look at everything. Okay? And there are some definitions and examples of artifacts. Are really your plans, schedules, anything you produce as a work product, okay? Records, emails, and process descriptions. And also you can have some web portals, repositories, wikis, etc. Okay? And affirmations is oral or written statements that affirms what you have really seen on there. And most of them is really interview responses. Now, if you conduct interviews through video conferences or audio conferences, that's formally tailoring. Okay? And the development plan has all of these contents. It takes a lot of time now to really put a documented data collection plan. But everybody knows about it. Everybody understands what it is and how it will be done. Selecting of the team membership. Previously, my experience counted. Right? My experience I could really bring in. My engineering experience would count in the overall team. And my management experience. Well, I have 29 years of management experience, right? Okay, well, that takes care of that. Now, what I have as an experience does not count. So we have to find the team members who meet the requirements, okay, outside of my experience. And those guys, they have to have at least 2 years of field experience each. So you can't wave your hands again and go, well, I have 1 year and I've done this and I've done... No, you can't camouflage it anymore. You really have to pick the people. And you can't have development people with no experience do services, right? You have, if you're looking at services appraisal, you got to find the people with the service experience, with the appropriate service experience to be the appraisal team members. And so the numbers really did not change, that what I have done in the past doesn't count anymore. And here, this is another new one. We had a lot of process people used to do what really was to be team members. They cannot be 100% process people anymore. Okay? You have to have practitioners there. And a senior manager who has supervisory experience of responsibility over the group, they cannot be ATM. And the sponsor cannot be ATM. So there are some clear-cut differences that you need to do. Okay, then this leads into conflict of interest. In the previous versions, SCI was never really concretely saying if a lead appraiser does consulting, he should not be the lead appraiser. They had a difficulty saying that. A lot of hand waving again, depending on what you did, et cetera, et cetera. There is now a very specific, concrete conflict of interest. Okay? And this section really clarifies it. All right, lead appraisers must document potential conflict of interest and make them visible to the sponsor and to the appraisal that's to be done. And we have to always use our judgment, right? Qualifying and disqualifying. And there are some conflict of interest we cannot avoid. If you have all internal ATM, right, then royalties are going to be towards the organization. So you need to pick and choose the correct people who can be objective. Right? They're senior enough to be objective on the results, looking at what they really see. Okay? And the lead appraiser's business relationship with the sponsor might also be a conflict of interest. If the sponsor is your buddy, you may not be that impartial. Here's a scenario. If a lead, the scenario they're given is really the working a lead appraiser within the organization, but it could be a lead appraiser who really is contracted to do consulting to the organization as well. If the lead appraiser leads or a member of engineering process group, okay, or the lead appraiser has authored some engineering or management processes, that person should not be leading the appraisal. Okay. My philosophy has always been, I either consult or appraise. I will not do both. As a matter of fact, I was put into a position, I was hired as a consultant, this was overseas, and the sponsor tried to get me to do both. I looked at him in the eye and I said, I'm here to be a consultant. If you like me to appraise, I will walk out now. And he spoke the same language I did, so he could not say, oh, I did not understand the language. You can't. That's my personal philosophy, okay? You should not do it. But other appraisers do manage it, and they are okay as long as they document it. We're not saying there are certain things you really shouldn't do. That's obvious. Other types of conflict of interest you should document. For example, I recently did a 6-person, the ATM was 6 people, plus myself. 3 of them were the EPG members, the process people. 3 of them were practitioners, so I managed to get them to partner with a practitioner, with a process person. And those processes, I personally reviewed them myself. So that we would really, if they could not find it, I found the issues. If they couldn't really broad brush it again. Okay. And this is other questions. Some of the examples of questions, you should ask. So if you're preparing for an appraisal and you are sitting in a process group, these are the kind of questions you really need to ask when you're really picking and maybe recommending appraisal team members or ATMs. Okay? And if any of these questions are yes, you must really take steps to remedy, least that you really should share it with the lead appraiser so the lead appraiser knows. Because believe me, I interview them. I find out the answers. If they're a requirements person, I say, could you tell me what you have done? Have you done any investigation? Have you done some development? How did you do your development? So that I can really put them and qualify them as appraisal team members. Somebody who's just not somebody who's just maintaining records. And the process folks, in small companies, you are going to have them. You have no other way of doing it. Okay? You couple them, you make sure, and I make sure when there is any potential conflict of interest after I interview and make sure those are senior people, that they can be objective, I make sure that I look at those processes myself. Okay? I'm out of time. Could I buy some time? I'm close, very close. Okay. Preparing the team. All right, when you prepare the team, the default so far was you get an intact team, you do it, okay? For the version 1.3, you can prepare a large sets of folks who are not going to be participating, but you must document it and you must ask for a waiver from the CMMI Institute. There's nothing to say. I can train all of you to be the appraisal team members for a future, unforeseen, unscheduled event, but I must notify them. I can also train a services, potential ATM and development ATM all together. Again, I must notify the CMMI Institute and I must, get a waiver saying that they're approving that. The wisdom of that, I haven't figured out yet. This is getting objective evidence, again, affirmations. Now, this is another one of those. Those of you who've been through some of the appraisals, you may have actually had a what we call Class B event, in lieu of a readiness review. Now, we must have discrete events. So there's nothing wrong with being a Class B event, but you must have a readiness review separate than that event, and then a SCAMPI A, And you can, if you do any characterizations at all during a readiness review, that kicks off a 90-day constraint cycle. You must finish it by then. And there's nothing wrong, again, with doing a Class B or a C. And if you combine that with a readiness review, or you can, in lieu of that readiness review, you must kick off that 90-day constraint again. And as you know, you cannot change any documentation once you kick off that 90-day constraint. This is verification, and there's some adequacy with that. And then what you really do before, those of you who've been through again, we had to have 50% of affirmations, etc. So there was a lot of rules. Now the rules are based on your data collection strategy and plan. So when you're really getting ready for it, you have to figure out what kind of work is done in your organization. Right? First you do, why am I doing this? Okay, I gotta do this. What kind of work is done? Put them into groups. And then think in terms of those factors. What makes a difference? Determine you want a maturity or capability level, because someday DoD might just take that out and they might say, CMMI-like practices, and then you're off the hook, right? You don't have to have that certificate to show. And then you can, together with the lead appraiser, you can determine the scope of that appraisal. How big, how small, how focused, because all it's going to really impact the total cost, both the internal cost and the external cost that you're going to spend. The model will go with that, because if you're primarily services, you can use services. If you're primary development, you can do that. And your strategy, how you're going to do that. Again, those factors are really going to impact how you get ready, the total cost of what you're really doing. And also, as a process person, you should tell the sponsor, be prepared to spend at least an hour, okay? Because we want to know. We're not there to evaluate. Yes, we are going to evaluate, but our objective is really also to help you get to where you need to go. And if you're not going to get anywhere, I'll tell you, forget this, you're not ready. Okay. With that, I'm done. You had a question? Well, go ahead.
It's interesting that you said you prefer a 3 to a 5. Could you give a specific of something that's in the 5 that, and what you mean by that?
At level 5, you really quantify your processes, okay? And you really can then predict your error factors. And you look at your root causes and you really take a look at the root causes. And that's really how you really look at it. You're a lot more predictable of the outcomes of the processes. At level 3, you're really focused on putting a solid plan together, implementing to that plan, and managing the cost, the effort, and the variation on delivery of that effort with all of the engineering functions. That's really the difference between the 5. So I may look at quantifiably onto my schedule and how I can predict the changes in my schedule, okay, at level 5. At level 3, I'm looking at my schedule. I'm doing it more intuitively and saying, okay, we have this much hours. We're behind schedule by X amount. Now, do I give overtime or do I change my schedule, right? But in level 5, I could say, well, this is the effort. We might run into these types of impediments, and I might have to budget some overtime. So those are really the differences of looking at it.
Are there some projects where you would feel more comfortable then because there is a 5 instead of a 3?
Yes, I mean, what I really say, if you are dealing with human lives, you better make sure it's level 3, okay? Because you are, I don't do a lot of DoD stuff, but if it's a laser bomb that's going to hit someplace, I want to be dead sure that target is the only target, okay? And within very constrained time, right? That's really what. But that's a level 5 effort to me because I want to be able to predict the outcome of not only my work, but all the processes that might impact it. I want to be dead sure that I'm not going to cause any negative impact, okay? At level 3, you're doing web development. Okay, level 3, this is level 3 as far as I'm concerned. Microsoft, right? It's got a lot of issues to it. Do they need to be level 5? No, because all of us have learned to live with application errors. But I'm sitting in a cockpit of a jet engine. I don't want any engine. Boeing, I would like to have them at level 5. Okay? Because again, there's human lives involved. How much of an error you can really live with. How much of the errors that software in the system is going to go out there with. I mean, last year we were at Kennedy Space Center. And I looked at, I still have goosebumps, really. Well, first, I wanted to be an astronaut, but I couldn't. I was not the right gender. So, at the time. So I looked at it, and I looked at their systems and their control things. It's a miracle. It really is a miracle that they were able to accomplish what they accomplished. That, I would go for a level 5, okay? Because, again, we're dealing with lives. But when you're doing a web, when you're dealing with railway, for example, if you're doing railway controls and there's a lot of human lives involved, if there's issues, then I would go for a 5. But other things, adapting software, that's what I see in China quite a bit. They really try to do B2B, B2C kinds of commerce applications. That I can live with a solid 3. Okay, that's how I make the distinction.
Okay, so we're going to break for the.
If you have questions, pardon me.
Raffle.
If you have questions, I'll be here. I will not leave until I exhaust all the questions. Okay. Thank you.
All right. So first, thank you very much for the presentation.
And the slides are going to be posted on the site, so you can really take advantage of it if you're really interested in the details.
And thanks to Jolie, we will probably also have a movie.
Okay.